Welcome to Book Salve and a very different type of entry into my As I Read series of videos. I haven't done one like this before. I've just taken a weekend trip away to visit my daughter in Bristol, which means that I have to do a over 4 hour trip by train, and the whole thing has obviously required me to do an adjustment to my regular reading plan. Because in order to read, I need to read properly. I need a quiet, isolated environment with a very minimum of distractions. And I have my notebook and pen. I've got the translucent sticky labels that I highlight passages in the book. Um, and I've always got at hand my favourite Collins English dictionary to look words up in, just as kind of traditional thing rather than using the internet to do that. Um, and I've got my peaceful home flat reading nook, which you can see here. The light's coming in at the right angle and everything's wonderful. So I couldn't possibly read properly on a train. So that's where my Kindle, which actually I inherited from my from the daughter that I went to visit, when it comes into play, and I engage in what I would call speed reading. I've got about, oh, I don't know, by now, getting on 20 books, I suppose, downloaded onto my Kindle, and I have read, I don't know, nearly 5 books via Kindle now, I guess. I much prefer reading from a real book and having the feel and the heft and the knowledge that the book is there for real. Um, but I've adapted to reading on the Kindle, and it's easier in that I don't need my reading glasses. I can just read. Um, just make the text big enough for me to see quite easily. Anyway, speed reading. It doesn't mean reading the book very quickly without taking much notice to it. What it does mean is reading a book without taking notes. So it requires me to choose a book that will not be too demanding in terms of the prose, not too complicated with long sentences and lots of different uh, uh, meandering descriptions of things, and it's not requiring the retention of, oh gosh, knowing the relationships between a whole host of different characters, or the action suddenly flipping from one point of view to another, and you've got to work out, hang on, who is it that's actually doing this bit? It's got to be pretty straightforward. So there are many books that I have read in the past and really enjoyed. I like that kind of complexity in my reading. Um, that I'd stop reading if I was reading on a Kindle because I couldn't appreciate it properly, and those kind of books deserve to have a closer, more careful and discerning read. Um, consequently, there was no chance that I could continue reading The Children of the Dead over the weekend. It's far too demanding a read, and anyway, the hardback edition of the novel that I've got is far too heavy and cumbersome to transport and read in the wild. You just, yeah. So I pick what I imagine would be a more accessible and lighter read. It's a book that I think has created a little bit of a splash in book in booktube circles. Maybe, I don't know. A debut novel called Nesting by the Irish author Roisin O'Donnell. And it was longlisted for the 2025 Women's Prize for Fiction. Um, I'm that old that I always still think of it as the Orange. It's probably decades since it was called that, I don't know. And although it didn't make the shortlist, all the booktube reviews I've seen of it seem overwhelmingly enthusiastic and positive. Um, My progress with The Children of the Dead's been laboriously slow. It's hard going. But in this mode of reading, it took me, if I think about the speed it took me, this is um, the nesting is about 500 pages, and it's taken me, I guess, around about 10 hours. Um, Maybe a bit less, not sure. But anyway, it's about a page a minute, which I think is about my normal pace for reading uh, if I'm not really getting into um, taking notes and thinking deeply about each uh, passage or sentence that comes up, and I go, "Oh, that's really nice. I'll copy that down and I'll have a think about it." If it's just uh, a narrative that I can just follow, and here's the story, and this is what happened, and this has happened next, and this happened next, then that would be about the pace that I read at. Um, so the change of pace is not just down to not taking notes; it's a reflection of the simple language and the simple sentences used by Roisin O'Donnell in the book, and that's clearly a choice. Um, the book's clearly meant to have the widest appeal and readership that it could possibly have. It's definitely an easy reader, and that's one issue that I've got with it. I do start to think, reading a book like that, I go, must you hold my hand and guide me carefully and patronisingly through everything that you have to say in case I misinterpret it? I mean, is there nothing that's allowed to be ambiguous or complex or puzzling? I am, as a reader, are you not trusting me to infer anything for myself? It's got to be spelt out. And simplicity can be a virtue at times. It can be a stylistic choice that maybe it reflects the voice of the narrator, or is clearly somebody's the narrator's using it to hide something that's darker and deeper. But in nesting, the tone's one of a straightforward, unadorned testimony, as though it was a transcript of a record of the statement from a witness in a court case. Um, and that can start to be a little bit annoying. It can be a little bit condescending, I find. Don't know. Probably me just being a snob. Well, the novel's set in Dublin in 2018 and concerns a around about 30-year-old married woman who decides, not for the first time, to flee from her abusive husband, taking with her their two young daughters. And the action covers the period from that brave decision and follows its consequences over the next year or year and a half. Um, and nesting's dealing with some very serious social failings. It covers a wide range of concerns that we all should have, and many of which are not all that often investigated by journalists and not covered by the media, and disgracefully only served by demeaning, insufficient, ineffective, and bureaucratic services that are hugely underfunded and largely ignored when it comes to um, uh, attention by the UK government, and in this case, the Irish government, I guess, alike. Uh, and it's probably true of America as well, although I've got no, I don't know about that. And they impact almost exclusively women, um, and especially vulnerable women. And they cause unwarranted cruelty and misery. This is something that we desperately need to address, and we don't, and we haven't for decades, and that's a terrible thing. So a huge shout out to Roisin for bringing this subject to the attention of literary circles, at least, and probably the sofas of many daytime TV talk shows, I imagine, who've picked it as their book of the week or whatever, and revealing the unbearable burdens and degradations that are placed upon women who find themselves in the situation of trying to free themselves from abusive relationships, whilst also somehow being the sole carer for their children, for which their partner should be equally responsible. But in our society, it's still true that somehow the burden and responsibility is somehow still expected to be shouldered primarily by the mother. Things have changed a little bit, but not enough as yet. In my opinion, though, the novel falls on its face. It's far too melodramatic. And although it reaches for realism, some kind of ultra realism, it's trying to be as matter of fact as it possibly can be. It overreaches and acquires the narrative of a daytime soap opera. The protagonist, Kiara, is unfailingly angelic and stoic and utterly innocent of any wrongdoing. She's naive, hardworking, resilient, while the antagonist, Ryan, her husband, is an even more unbelievable paragon. Uh, but of evil, not of rather than good, and though he's drawn in much sketchier form with broader, ill-defined strokes. And it's true that the situation in the books do arise. This does happen to real people, and it's a really serious thing that we allow it to continue to happen, and we won't fund the solutions that could be there if we had the will to put them in place, and that suffer. Oh, excuse me. That women do suffer greatly from the consequences of their partner's cruelty or moral corruption or dominance in far too many marriages or partnerships. And Roisin does well to stress and focus on the psychological cruelty, the gaslighting, the financial dependence, the isolation from family and friends, and the unreasonable demands and expectations that her husband has over her. And she puts the focus more on that than physical brutality. I think it would have been easy to have picked up that as a theme. It's clearly there, but it's not mentioned, and she shirks back from ever saying, "Oh, my husband's been physically abusive to me." So, although I guess he's not outright battered her at any particular time, he is physically abusive to her, to the point of demands for sex being tantamount to rape, I would imagine. But none of those kind of details are delved into. Um, but the book wants to cover all the trials, deprivations, and indignities that might befall a woman fleeing from an abusive relationship. And in order to cover that much ground, in my opinion, you would need to weave in the stories of other characters. In Nesting, Kiara's portrayed as some kind of super being in the end. There's no matter how much and how often and how frequently she's beaten down, she struggles through, she maintains her principles, and she casts off the effects of depression and fatigue and the spiralling out of control hopelessness of her situation and the hell she's forced to endure through the continuous evil intentions and actions of Riot. And it's just not realistic. Any normal human being would actually succumb if the punishments were that relentless. And we do understand that, I think, as a novel, as you read it, that, well, this is going to have a happy conclusion. Uh, it's a kind of, there's no way that this book is going to leave us with a downbeat, uh, no hope ending. Um, it's and that's undoubtedly unreal. It's such as it portrays a catastrophic explosion of misery, it wouldn't typically end in a happy ever after scenario in real life, and most probably the nightmare would persist with a very dark ending. Or rather, I guess the reality would be that in most cases, not all of those things would happen to one person without some kind of intervention or relief or assistance. Um, Bad things happen again and again and again after over and over and over to Kiara, and yeah, okay, uh, all those things are do really happen, but do they really happen that much all to one person without the kind of support? She's got a family who support her who live in Sheffield, um, and she can't access them. I don't know. Um, but the book seems extremely well researched. And there's a degree of symbolism in there. For example, the crow, which is I think really well done, um, and that symbolism's woven into the story and shows a degree of inspiration. I think the story of the crow, and the this verisimilitude of each of the individual episodes, each one in itself, is very well done and emotionally affecting. The demands of child rearing are scrupulously observed. You do get to feel this is what it is like to be the mother of very small children, irrespective of the position that Kiara um, finds herself in. And the narrative's heartbreaking. And your sympathies are with Kiara. Um, Totally, and they're fully utilised to aid and well distract perhaps from the breakneck speed of the plot. Somehow you do feel sometimes, oh, slow down. Let's look at that in a bit more um, psychological depth. Maybe I don't know. Some of the things just happen, yeah, very quickly. And Kiara's bit like a character in a populist horror film. She takes some silly decisions, and amidst taking some rather obvious ones that could help her situation and to access help and to accumulate, particularly to accumulate evidence of her husband's cruelty and to expose his lies, she very much sort of goes, "Oh no." It's as though she's saying, I can't prove that he's been horrible to me. He's been horrible to me. Yeah, come on, she's an intelligent woman, and yes, some of that can be explained by her stressed situation and her overburdened state of mind, and that she's at the end of her tether. But on the other hand, she is depicted almost all the way through as hugely competent and resourceful in practical matters. When she has got to look after her children with the utter minimum of resources at hand and terrible situation that she's in, um, she manages to do that. She doesn't just collapse into self pity or that. She's she adapts to it and she makes it work with what she's got. So in reading the book, it seems to me that it says don't stop to think, just emote. And that's the novel's entreaty to the reader. And in the end, although I can admire a book that upsets me and brings me to tears, yeah, I got upset reading it. I want a book that also challenges me and wants me to think for myself, and not one that hands me its thesis all parceled up in a package and tied up with a nice bow. Um, because nobody could come away from reading the book uh, with any sympathy at all for Ryan, or even hold the slightest condemnation of anything that Kiara had ever done. He was evil, she was perfect. I don't know. It's not. it's not sophisticated in those terms, I feel, and because of that, not realistic in itself. So nesting's one of those Kindle reads, unlike others that I've read. Let's see, um, Rachel Cusk's Parade, Hiromi Kawakami's Under the Eye of the Big Bird. Both of those I intend to get myself hard copies so that they can go on my shelf and be part of my library. But I don't feel a need to acquire a hard copy of this book. Nesting is okay. It's not terrible, and it's got a lot of things that do go for it. But all in all, I can really understand why it didn't make the Women's Prize shortlist. And that's it from me. So it's cheerio from Booksolve, and happy reading to you all. Bye bye.